I've thought a lot about creativity lately, and I have the thought and I've convinced myself, and I'm pretty sure I'm right, that every single person is creative because everybody has something unique that has never been seen or experienced before to give to the world. Because no person who has ever lived or ever will live is the exact same, and so everybody has something to give. The problem comes when we, I think, especially in this modern day, are starting to really box in and really shrink down what it what it's like to be creative, what creativity is like. When you have that thing you want to learn or want to do or want to create, maybe you want to learn to dance, or maybe you want to learn to play an instrument, learn to draw, learn to paint, maybe you want to create something, learn a software, create a game, whatever it might be. Learn to cook food, learn to bake, just do something. There's always this obstacle that I think many of us find ourselves in nowadays, especially in the very early stages of doing something that we really want to do. And that obstacle, what is that? And I think it comes down to us really having put restrictions and confinement and rules to what it's like to be creative, of what creativity is defined as. We have put these quality expectations of what is creative enough and not creative enough, what is defined as art and what isn't. And because we have all of these definitions, and because people are such in disagreement, that also means many of us are not entirely creating for the joy of creating anymore. We are creating for the expectation of being recognized by others and being accepted by others, especially in the same kind of communities where you are having these interests. And yes, this can be called negative thinking, but I also want to draw in a metaphor that I've heard in two different examples, but the concept is the same. One of them is an alpine skier who wants to become the best alpine skier he can be. And as he zigzags down that hill, the main obstacle he's going to meet are the trees on the road, and he has to zigzag between many tight trees in a very high speed. And so, what is important in this situation is to not focus on the trees, but instead focus on the path he's going to take. Because once you start focusing on the trees, the things he has to avoid, suddenly that becomes the focus that takes up his whole field of vision. And automatically, those take up much of his focus. The alpine skier is almost unintentionally aiming for the trees, and as he does so, he's going to lose his balance, he's going to lose his focus, and perhaps he's even going to crash into a tree, or at least a tree might make him stop in his path. The other example is a pilot who's learning to fly a plane, and what he is taught is not to avoid the mountainside and not crash into the mountains, but instead he is taught to focus on the path he's supposed to fly. And the reason for that is because once you start to focus on the other things that you have to avoid, suddenly you start to make up things. You start to make up stories, and we're very good at making up stories that we believe in ourselves, in our minds. We are very good at believing in our thoughts, especially if they are negative, because in a way, in many ways, we are made to survive and avoid danger. And so when we start to make up stories about the dangers of trying something new, or creating something and sharing it with the world, or whatever it might be, when we start to make up stories that things around that are maybe not physically dangerous, but dangerous in a social setting, we start to avoid them. We start to see them as a threat. And so it hinders our path, it hinders our freedom and our joy of creation. And suddenly, those trees or those mountains for the pilot become an obstacle when they really were not in the first place. When the skier has to stop in front of the tree because he was so focused on not crashing into it, he has made the tree something more than what it originally was. He created the story that he could possibly crash into it, that it was much more dangerous or much more difficult to avoid than he would want to. And he starts to manifest that. he starts to believe in that. And suddenly, almost automatically, he's going to almost crash into it. His progress is halted, and the tree becomes much more of a problem than it needed to be in the first place. And that is exact same thing as this negative thinking, as we can call it. But I don't like to use negative thinking as a term because it has become a bit of a cliche, I feel, to think positive. But the thing is to see and recognize what that negative thinking is. Because if you sit here and really want to start something, but you are really in the mindset of all of this is going to be way too difficult. People on TikTok and Instagram and Reels and Shorts and everywhere, so many people are so amazingly good at what I want to become good at. How am I going to compare? And you start to make up all of these stories of how difficult things are going to be. But none of those stories are happening here. None of those stories are happening in the present. In reality, you're just sitting here with blank sheets of paper and you can fill them in with whatever you want. You can start right now to play a few strums on the guitar or to draw a few lines on paper. Those are the differences between the thoughts of the future, the imagination of this imaginary tree, and what is the actual path that is just there all the time. What I think we need to become aware of is the motivation for wanting to do something. I think there are two core motivations for doing anything at all. It is something based on fear and something based on joy. And the fear motivation is very dominant nowadays, isn't it? When we see someone and we compare ourselves to them in some shape or another, in any way whatsoever, we are really doing it out of fear. We are longing for something and we fear that if we don't become like this person or if I cannot perform like that person, I'm not going to be enough on the scale of judgment that we are made ourselves. We start to make the motivation a result based thing that has really nothing to do with the joy of making something or doing something or the act of doing the activity in the present moment. But we start to chase after the dopamine and the safety that comes with being recognized by other people. And really, that is not a, at least most of the time, not a motivation based on joy. And creativity is joy. In the core of it, it can be both negative and positive, but it's a joy of creating something at the core of it. But when you chase this results based on other people's reactions and opinions, suddenly that motivation is at its roots based in fear. When you're doing that, you're really stepping into a role. You want to be recognized as that person who can do that thing that well. You're stepping into a role that you want to be recognized as. And you make up all of these kind of stories of why that ladder is going to be so hard to climb because you start to put everything in a measurable scale. Every single person that you have seen make something, you start to measure everything based on quality. And so you start to place yourself there as well. And naturally, that creates a very unreachable scenario in our minds. And suddenly, that little seed that was really something based on joy, on pure creativity, has become a result based thing, based on results of what other people have accomplished and what you currently have not accomplished. And that creates the tree that the alpine skier is avoiding, and that creates the mountain that the pilot is avoiding as well. On the contrary, if you create something for the joy of it, because you feel good doing it, because you have fun doing it, you are not in a role anymore. You are instead yourself. And the motivation for it becomes much more of a passion, something true and something real, and the results of it, and especially the results of when it comes to reactions from other people and the scale of how far it will spread, what kind of ranking it will get, etc., starts to fade out when it comes to how important it is. Because that is not the reason you are doing the thing you are doing. Because if you start to become aware of this, do I really enjoy what I'm doing here? Or am I only doing it because I want to feel good enough from recognition from other people? You're not living in the present, basically. You are far off into an imaginary future with a whole lot of expectations and judgments where everything is based on that. Your whole value is based on that. Whereas if you are doing something for the joy of it, you are here and now. You are doing the activity you are doing in the present, and that's all that really matters. And that's where the dangers of TikTok and Instagram Reels and YouTube Shorts and so on come in, because more than ever before, we are able to look into other people's lives and other people's talents and other people's passions from all over the world. And the more people we see are good at something, the more we start to naturally compare ourselves, especially when all this is packed into numbers of likes and comments and subscribers, etc. We defined our creative joy with numbers. And that's where the motivation starts to shift over from something that is actually creative and joyful into something based actually on fear. And if you can just get more into that awareness of what you actually enjoy doing, suddenly those obstacles of that thing is too hard to learn, or that thing will, I will never be as good as those people because those people that I've seen on TikTok or my colleagues or whatever have done this for so long, those things don't become obstacles anymore. They only become obstacles if you choose for them to be so, because they are stories, after all. And in all this, the ironic thing is that this negative thinking is also creative. This negative thinking are, these thoughts are stories. They are stories of struggle. They are stories of obstacles and of resistance. They are stories that are creative. Everything we do is creative. In fact, when you sit down to watch a movie and you get opinions or expectations of what comes next, that is creative. You're creating a story in your mind. That is your personal interpretation, your personal story that you're making. That is creative. How you imagine the scenarios when you're reading a book, or what scenarios or memories that are coming up when you listen to music. All of these things are creative. The thing is just that we have put these boundaries and these rules and these boxes that define what is creative and what isn't. Much thanks to social media, which now compares everything that is creative to numbers. But all of these things are creative. All of these things that go through our minds, all our emotions, all our thoughts that want to come out through some shape or form, they can just be words. It's creativity in play. So when you start to get out of the identification with results, an identification with numbers, an identification with a fear-based motivation, you start to slip back into pure creativity, as I like to call it. A pure joy, which is not depending on you sitting there for an hour and practice hard, or to get a huge amount of numbers on something that you share with the world. It can be 5 minutes of strumming on a guitar to get disharmonic tones. It can be a few lines on a sheet of paper, or it can be words that you share with someone of an opinion of you have of any sort of media. All of this is what actual creativity is. And what you will notice is that things that you create that is based on something that you really enjoy is, at least in my personal experience, is always going to be better. Is always going to turn out better 100% of the time than something you make just to finish it, just to have something to share, just to get that dopamine feedback of people in order to feel good enough about yourself. It's important in all of this to remember that nothing in this world is perfect. In fact, no shape in nature is a perfect square or a perfect box or rectangle or sphere or circle. There are no perfectly shaped shapes in nature, even though what we often define as good art can be the perfectly shaped cake or the perfectly shaped sculpture or the perfectly shaped body or whatever it might be. But this is just one little tip of the entire depth and scale of everything that makes up the world. The positive and the negatives make up everything. If you create a tune, a song, an instrumental tune that is very disharmonic, have very disharmonic chords, great, because if we didn't have those, we wouldn't be able to appreciate the beautiful harmonic chords with three tones or maybe a fourth major seven chord of all of these beautiful ones, right? And if we didn't have those, we also couldn't get the contrast of having the disharmonic chords, which does something to us. All of it is art. All of it is creativity at play. All of it is expressing something in the opposites that makes up everything in this world. In that way, everything is interesting. Everything is something. And so try to move a bit away, or at least become aware of why you do the things you do and what you actually enjoy doing. Is it based on something you are afraid you need in order to get the recognition you want in order to feel good enough? Or is it something that you actually do because you love doing it and it gives you energy? It gives you an overload of joy when you do it. Because those are the different things between fear and joy, between what I call result based creativity and just pure creativity. And all of us have creativity in us. Because as I said, you do it every day. When you interpret, when you imagine, when you talk to people, when you have opinions and tastes, all of that is creativity. The only thing you need to do is to recognize it, stop resisting it, stop judging it so much, and start to see the path between the trees instead of making up all kinds of trees along the way. Because creativity, you have it everywhere, and you can express it in any way you want. And the best way to do it is in some way that brings you joy.